At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! You're king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES Podcast, episode number 193. I am Greg. He is Joe, your usual co-host. Your usual co-host for this podcast, and we're covering a game this time that Joe picked. A game that was very interesting to cover for this podcast. For reasons that we're going to get into. We were looking at Super NES adaptation of True Lies, which was a very popular 1994 movie featuring, of course, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So. What was your motivation for picking this game, Joe? And did you have any prior experience with it?
So I had prior experience with this. I also did have this for the Sega Genesis as a kid, but my memories lie in playing this game over a friend's house who had the Super Nintendo. And as a Sega kid, you would think I would have a 6-button controller, and games like this would be fun with a 6-button controller, and they are. But I did not have a 6-button controller. I had the standard 3-button controller, which made games like this really a pain, especially cycling through the different weapons and stuff. Whereas with the Super Nintendo version, you had the 4 face buttons and your shoulder buttons, and it made things a lot easier.
Side note, I remember seeing those 6-button Genesis controllers in the store. They weren't that expensive. They were like $20.
You know, for a Genesis kid who literally had to trade in all of his Nintendo stuff to get a Genesis.
Good point, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they weren't that expensive, but also, like, they were expensive enough. My parents never instilled, like, the whole do your chores, get an allowance sort of thing. We just couldn't do that, you know, because there's 3 of us kids. And, you know, my dad made decent money after we had grown. But, you know, up until, like, I was in high school, like, you know, we lived paycheck to paycheck, literally. And, you know, they did a very good job of hiding that fact. You know, we didn't find out till years later.
Right. Okay.
We were in such dire straits. So, you know, 6-button controller was not afforded to me. Like, I was the kid who played Street Fighter, having to hit the start button to swap between kicks and punches, which was horrible. But also, like, that's why, like, M. Bison is my go-to, because I could just have his, like, slide kick, and it was fantastic. Anyways, True Lies is a fantastic movie. This is one of the few movies that, as a kid, I mean, 94, we're talking, I'm 13, that, you know, I had a really cool, I mean, I still have a really cool aunt, but she would take me to go see weird movies and stuff that I probably shouldn't be seeing. So, like, my dad had taken me to go see, like, Terminator 2, and, like, that was, like, such a huge thing, because I was, like, one of the few kids that got to go see, like, Terminator 2, and that came out a couple years before this. And then my aunt took me to go see this, and that kind of cemented this for me. And just so you know how cool my aunt is, my aunt took me to a dingy art house theater in Rhode Island. It's called the Park Theater. I don't even think it's a theater anymore, but it's right in Cranston. And we saw Pulp Fiction opening weekend.
Okay, all right.
With, I think, like 10 people in the theater. Like, there was nobody there. And talk about an experience. But anyways, so True Lies, I have my aunt to thank for that, and then my friend down the street who had a Super Nintendo and allowed me to play this gem of a game.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Was True Lies PG-13?
You know, I will quickly Google that and tell you, but I'm pretty sure I thought it was R.
Because it had kids in it, so I'm like, you know, I don't really know they usually they usually don't mix the two. Sometimes they do, but but anyway, yeah. So I agree with you about the movie. The movie's very good. I had never played this game before because I learned the hard way as an NES kid that most movie license games sucked. So
true.
So I mean, of course, of course, there were a few exceptions. Batman's an excellent game. There were a few other games. I have a soft spot in my heart, actually. Speaking of my Schwarzenegger movies, I actually have a soft spot in my heart for Total Recall. It's not a great game, but I still like it. So.
By the way, True Lies rated R.
Rated R. Okay. All right. Yeah. I saw very few R movies before I was, before I was like 16. So, but
like I said, I was fortunate enough to have a cool aunt.
well, she didn't have to like raise you. It's like kind of like a grandmother. A grandmother's kind of like she doesn't care what she does because she can like send you home.
Right.
But yeah. So the movie. The movie was very popular, so it wasn't it wasn't a shock they wanted to make they wanted to make games the games based off of it. Mm-hmm. So Beam Software developed the Super NES and Genesis versions of the game. We've covered Beam in recent podcasts. They were very mixed track record for their games, but spoiler, True Lies is actually one of their better efforts. So and they also made a scaled down version of the game for the Game Gear and the Game Boy as well too. So the game was published by depending upon which version of the the game that you bought, either Acclaim or LGN. Because Acclaim owned LGN by this point. LGN was on the box cover for the Super NES version. Acclaim was on the box cover for the Genesis, and I'm like, that may also have hurt some because LGN had a reputation during the NES days for having published some real stinkers of games. But
but I don't remember it being as prevalent as it is today. Today you mentioned LGN and people are like, oh my god, the rainbow of crap.
And there were some good games that they published. I mean, unfortunately, the games they published that are bad were so bad that people just kind of just put the same, unfortunately just put the same lumping all over the whole thing. But for example, Back to the Future is almost unplayable. But But Jaws, I think, is actually a pretty good game because that was actually developed by I think it was Atlas that developed Jaws. So there
I think you're right.
Yeah, there actually was a good developer behind that. But actually, LGN got better in the Super NES days. Most people don't realize that, but most of the games they published in the Super NES 16-bit days were a lot better than the earlier stuff. So, sorry. Sorry. I think I cut you off there when I was going through that rant.
No. I was just gonna say, in general, movie license tie-in games, I think changed with the 16-bit era. You mentioned Batman Returns. That's one of the few games that I can think of that came out, and I was just wow. I was that's really good. Jurassic Park's the other. That was pretty decent. So, I mean, there was definitely some movie tie-in games that have definitely proven their worth, but it's few and far between. It's not quite the crap shoot that people would want you to believe.
Sure. We haven't covered LGN yet in this podcast. So I'll just give a quick summary of the company. They weren't around for very long, actually. They were founded in 1970. In the 70s to the first half of the 80s, their heyday. They were primarily a toy company. They're best known for the toys that they put out. During that time period. They started to branch into games. After. Toward the late 80s, after the toy line started to decline, and Acclaim bought them in 1990, continuing to kind of kind of like interchangeably published games and you're on like one or one of the company label. It wasn't the same thing as like Konami and Ultra, because Konami created Ultra specifically to get around the limitation about like five games a year, because LGN was still a separate company. They were a company they were just owned by Acclaim. Because of that, Acclaim used LGN as kind of like a dump off for like the B grade titles, which I think is one reason why a lot of their games didn't do very well and has such a bad reputation these days, because like you mentioned Acclaim, most people certainly think fonder of Acclaim than they do for LGN. Right. So anyway, so eventually the losses continued. Like Acclaim closed LGN in 1994. So. This actually was in the very last games to come out with the either one of the last games or the last game to come out with the LGN label, as a matter of fact. Then, because of that. So so what we have here is surprisingly the easy route would have been for it to go as a side-scrolling platformer game, which is like many horrible movie tie and license games did, but instead they went with a top-down type perspective for this one instead, which is like primarily an action game. There are some elements of very light puzzle solving here too, but very, very light puzzle solving. So primarily top-down. Primarily you're playing as the main hero. Like in the movie, like Harry Tasker. I thought there was one stage 8, where you are flying a jet instead, which is like pretty cool. So, but anyway, yeah. So the game follows the movie pretty well for the most part. I mean, there are of course liberties taken, but the game seems to follow the overall plot of the movie, like the movie reasonably well. Just focusing upon the the heavy action oriented stuff. The movie had. Of course, being a Schwarzenegger movie, there was of course tons of action explosions anyway. So. It made for a good license. And some games you look at and you're like, they made a game based off that movie, but like this game at least made sense, because they made a lot of like games off Schwarzenegger movies. And then you have Terminator 1 and 2, Predator, Total Recall we already mentioned. There's probably others too that I can't think of like right now. But they turned a lot of Schwarzenegger movies like into games.
Did you happen to watch the movie so that you could kind of compare the two?
I could not get a copy of the movie in time for the podcast, unfortunately, because for some reason the movie's not available legally in digital format or streaming. You actually have to get like a copy of the DVD. So I guess there's I tried to buy one. I never got it. Long story. So
yeah, apparently there's some rights issues and whatnot.
Yeah, I did watch highlights of it though to refresh my memory.
Yeah. So I of course rewatched it so that I could see the similarities, and I was actually surprised at how well they did sticking to the plots of the movie.
Yeah.
They did a really good job from start to finish, which surprised the hell out of me, in all honesty. Because usually licensed games, they take a lot of liberties just to pad out the game.
Of course, yes. Which is another reason, like a lot of them like very like poor quality. But but okay. Since you have a little bit more knowledge about the movie than I do, Joe, why don't you talk about the gameplay?
So you got the top-down gameplay. You play as Harry, and it goes just like it does in the movie. So you infiltrate a mansion, and I can't remember exactly 100% why he is there. But
you have to
plot
hack the computer.
Plot MacGuffin. He basically gets found out, ends up having to go outside of the mansion and go skiing, which was a fun little treat. In this game, you have your pistol, which I believe has infinite ammo.
It does. It's the only weapon it does.
And then you can pick up like a shotgun. You can pick up a Uzi. I think you could pick up a submachine gun, like almost like an AK. Later on, I think you get a bazooka. You definitely get grenades. I mean, it's your typical.
Yeah, like you get a flamethrower, like I said, the bazooka.
There we go. And it's like, oh, man, like the characters are just right to where they're cartoony, so it fits the aesthetic of the rest of the graphics in the game, but yet the character sprite is just big enough to show a little bit more detail than you'd expect. I really like the sprite work in this game. It's not anything fantastic, believe me. But it's really good for the time. It being a licensed game, it doesn't deserve to be as good as it is. That's for sure. And the sound effects are so satisfying. Like when you when you hit the trigger or the button to shoot, like it feels like you're shooting. You really feel like you're actually shooting whoever it is. This game is so much fun. I love this game. It kind of reminds me of now that we've played it. What's it called? Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Like
You're not the only person to make that comparison. Other people that you made that. Yeah, the other folks made that too. So
like that's one of the first things I thought of when we played. Zombies Ate My Neighbors the first time around. That was the first thing I thought of. Was like, this reminds me of True Lies. And so like to be able to play True Lies now and like totally forgetting about that until like, started playing True Lies again. I'm like, this is like Zombies Ate My Neighbors. And it's like I said, it goes through the story beats like right on through, even to the point where, spoiler, when you go to beat the game, there's a point in the movie where the bad guy, terrorist, is hanging off of a missile, and Arnold is sitting in the cockpit of the airplane, and he says, "You're fired," and then he fires the missile. It's fantastic. They actually have a quote-unquote cutscene. We're going to call it a slideshow.
Digital stills is the proper.
Digital still of that moment, which
you look very good. Like the digital stills, like the movie, like I mean, like but it wasn't the only game. It's not the only 16-bit game to use digital stills in movies, but it always looks very good. So
it fits it perfect.
Yeah.
So to even see like those little details being in this game was really, really nice.
Right. So. Yeah, it's a very good summary about the game. The game's actually fairly long for being like a shooting game. There's 9 stages altogether. So thank God they gave you a passive feature, because the passive feature definitely would have helped back in the day.
And the thing I like too is like it's 9 stages, but it's also like they're pretty big. They're pretty big
yes.
stages.
So, yeah.
Like that first part with the mansion, like that's no joke. There's like at least 20, 24 different rooms that you can go into.
3 different levels, I think.
It's crazy. I mean, you can encounter, I think, 3 of the 6 different weapons that you can pick up just in the mansion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's unheard of. That, in the first level of any game, that you can see half of the weapons that you can pick up in the game.
The controls in this game are also very good. One of the features actually got like heavy advertisement back in the day. It's actually like on the box. Like the ability, like you have the ability to be able to shoot like in all 360 the directions. So like you can just like point and shoot, and like and depending upon the weapon you have, obviously, the pistol will fire straight. The Uzi, the Uzi and the flamethrower like actually have like a spread, but you can also strafe. The game calls it locking. Where you lock your gun to an angle like to shoot, which is very nice. For a console game of this time period to have that is pretty rare. They're very handy dive ability too also.
Yes, you can roll. That's kind of nice.
Yes, which is a feature totally needed. So, there's 3 difficulty levels, which also levels that also help. I seem to play this through on normal.
Oh yeah, I definitely played this on normal.
Yeah,
I wanted to play it on hard because of how many times I've played it. Like I definitely couldn't play it on easy, and I'm pretty sure in the past I have played it on easy, and it's like your typical easy, medium, and hard difficulties where
Yes,
like
yep.
easy only gets you so far and you have to play on normal. So I played through normal and beat it, of course.
A lot of people consider this game to be like very difficult. I think the game does ramp up in difficulty quite a lot, but I think it ramps up like very fairly because like the first few stages like feel like the first few stages feel like feel like a good prep for the rest of the game. Whereas the later stages, like yes it gets very difficult later on, but it's like you should expect that because the game's kind of teaching you how to play correctly.
Right.
Like using switching between weapons, using the 360 and the lock features are critical. The dive features critical. The game expects you to the game expects you by that point to have learned and to use those features correctly. So like the difficulty to scale. So I thought the difficulty that was all right.
Yeah. And like, and you really see that. You go from the first level where you're going through the mansion, you might have like 2, maybe 3 enemies on screen at one time. Like it teaches you that, using different weapons, using different tactics to take on, different enemies, who you can shoot and who you can't. I learned real quick in the first level numerous times. You can't just go guns blazing through the entire level because there are civilians. And they don't like it when you kill civilians.
Yes. 3 civilians cost you a life. So
yes. So it's you take your time, you go through your level, you learn who's an enemy and who's not.
Right, yeah.
And then, you strategically take them out. The snow level is one of those that's kind of fast paced, but yet it's
very frantic.
Still sort of the same thing. Like, yes, you're skiing, you can't control your movement as well as you could going through the mansion, but you still like everything's going to be an enemy that's coming at you, and you just need to avoid obstacles and stuff like that. And it just progressively, in my opinion, like you said, it's fair. As you progress, it's a natural progression, and it feels fair.
One thing I've had to mention before, which probably, which does kind of surprise me a little bit, but also testifying to how popular the movie was. The game also got released in Europe, Japan as well too. I mean, for most movie, a lot of movie games stay localized to one region or another. But I guess because Schwarzenegger is such an international star, the movie was shown worldwide, and so this game also got the worldwide. So that's another so there are some. The cover art's a bit different between the regions, but but beyond that, there are no differences. So, controls felt pretty tight. Once you get the hang of it, it was fine. I thought the layout of the 4 buttons is very good for this game.
Yes.
You can change the button layout in most games if you want to as well. So, that also helps. So the flamethrower is my favorite weapon. It's just unfortunate you don't get to use it very much because it's short range, but but it's very powerful, and the sound effect that the guys make they die by it's great.
Very true. See, mine was the Uzi, but also I'm the even today in modern games, I'm the run and gun until I die guy. So, the Uzi obviously fits me very well. I'm probably the one who figured out real quick that you can't shoot civilians in the first level because I'm run and gun guy. Anything that moves, it's being shot. So, the Uzi was my favorite, but also I loved also lobbing grenades every once in a while.
But yes, definitely. So, graphics. You take graphics. I talked about this a little bit earlier, Joe. I honestly think the graphics of this game are a mixed bag. I like the fact that how you mentioned before how the stages are very large. They definitely have that lived in feel to them.
Yep.
The houses feel like houses. The factories feel like factories, whatever. So everything's very large. Everything's also very detailed. It's you can see kitchens and computers and and house plants, whatever. Mm-hmm. So everything feels lived or worked in. So I appreciate, I appreciate the very large, detailed graphics. The colors, though, I thought were a bit bland and washed out.
That's fair.
They really weren't as vivid. Like there are many of the Super NES games. Right. I thought the graphic models for the characters was a bit wonky. Like Harry looks kind of Harry looks kind of like a big overstuffed doll to me, but he doesn't look like he doesn't look very human at all. But and neither do the other enemies too. I think so. It's like So the graphics in the game, the graphics in the game, I think are a mixed bag.
Yeah, that's fair.
The music though, however, was pretty good. There's no licensed music here, unfortunately, but the soundtrack is fitting for the game. It's one of the soundtracks which really is not remarkable outside of the game, but listening to it in the moment when you're playing the game, the music matches up with the action very, very well. So it's a very good soundtrack for this game as far as the actual action goes. And the sound effects I mentioned before are great. Also the graphics. There is blood. There is a lot of blood. And see that much blood in the Super NES game is a little bit surprising. So I also really appreciated that. So this is before at least the Super NES. This is before the ESRB rating came out, but I got to imagine with all the blood this game has, it probably the game probably would have gotten a T for teen rating.
Yeah, so my guess is, obviously 93 you had Mortal Kombat, and that got muted really bad on the Super Nintendo.
It did.
And lost to the Genesis because of that. I think that this was one of the first games after that fiasco that they were kind of like, okay, it's going to be just as good as the Genesis version, if not better, by having blood and, all the uncensored stuff. So I think that's a plus side here because, obviously Mortal Kombat 2 came out after this, and they went all in for, it to be arcade authentic as much as they possibly could on a, 12 meg card.
Right. What do you think about the music and the sound effects?
Music fits the game. You're right. You couldn't listen to the soundtrack outside of the game. It's not like something like Chrono Trigger or something like that where you can just pop it on a CD and listen to it in the car or whatever. But it's very atmospheric for the game itself. It fits the mood. And with the sound effects of, as you were talking about, the guys screaming as they're getting burned and just, getting, when they get shot. It's, it's great. I don't want to overpraise the game because it doesn't deserve it. It's good, but it's not that good. Get what I'm saying?
I actually feel the same way. But I was going to say that, this game was so I enjoyed this game a lot. This game was a pleasant surprise because because I think I stayed away from it just because it did movie license game. It's going to be terrible. But so the game's actually quite good. I think I think it was a very smart decision, as I said before, to make this game top down as opposed to being side scrolling. The stages are well designed. The action's fast and furious. I appreciate the weapons, the 360 control angle, and the locking feature, and the rolling is all very nice features to help you control the character. You can get a lot of lives in this game, which is good, thank God, because you are going to need them later on.
Yes.
And there's no, I did not find it, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no continue mode. So if you lose all your lives, you have to go back to your last password. So
yeah, so they why in 1994 they felt that they needed to have a password system and not a battery backup. Go figure. But thankfully, the password system is short enough to where it's not a hassle.
Yeah, and I think batteries are still. batteries still raise the cost of the game somewhat in the time period. So it's like they were trying to they're trying to keep that for the games like the games that really needed it, such as like RPGs.
Right.
But
and then and I'm sure you'll get to it. But there's quite a few secret codes that you can use in this game that help out immensely. So
yes.
I mean the password system isn't a hindrance. If anything, it's a benefit to this game.
Yes. Yeah, because definitely while the game is playable in one sitting, the password setting definitely does help you because they said the difficulty does ramp up quite a bit as you go through the game. So most playthroughs of this game on YouTube clock in about 2 hours. There's the speed run of this game appears to be like 45 minutes.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, the game's not perfect, like Joe mentioned. It does have some flaws. It does have the same flaws that any other game this time period it's going to have. The replay value is pretty limited, I think, once you actually master the game. It's like there's really not to there's really no incentive, the incentive to go back to it. I think you take damage a bit too easily, isn't it, in this game because your character so freaking large, so this game's probably better than it has a right of being, actually. But so if you enjoy action games of this time period, this game's definitely worth checking out. You don't need to know the movie to enjoy the game, but at least but having some familiarity with the movie as a tie-in will help increase your enjoyment, I think.
Yeah, I think they explain enough about the movie and what's going on in the still shots and cutscenes that build around the levels that I don't think you need to see the movie to fully enjoy it. But yeah, obviously having that context of the movie is going to make it that much better because you're going to be like, oh, I totally remember that part of the movie, and it's so cool to be able to go through and play through that setting. But this is one of those I definitely recommend you check out. You should play it at least once. Whether you're going to come back to it or not is totally going to be up to you and your preference in gaming. But you should at least have the controller in your hand and try it once. I go back to this game every once in a while.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I love just firing this ROM up and just going through and just shooting people. Just in the first part, the mansion part. Just going to the different rooms and just mowing down people just for the fun of it is great. And then, if you really want to have even more fun, you can put in the codes to where you can have, invisibility or infinite lives and then just, tear through everything. So there's a lot of replayability if you don't mind the monotony of and repetitiveness of the game. But if you're okay with that, I think this is one that you can go back to every once in a while and just kind of play through or play a level or two and just enjoy it, which is one of the things I like about the passwords. It's okay, well, I don't want to play through the mansion. I want to go play one of the later levels. I can go do that, thanks to the password system.
Yeah, definitely. So, I checked out so I looked at the Genesis version quickly, online. It looks to be exactly the same. So is it?
I felt it was pretty much the same. Obviously, the typical differences between Super Nintendo and Genesis really come down to the controller scheme, which controller you're using, which I had mentioned, and the other is the music department. The Genesis version, unfortunately, uses the GEMS sound design, so it's pre-rendered sounds that can be kind of plugged in a certain way to make certain music and whatnot easier for developers. And that's where you get a lot of those, people call it the cat meows and stuff like that. And it's not as good. If there is one thing I want to critique the Genesis version on, is that the music is not as good. The sound effects are pretty much the same. And graphically, I think they're both on par. But, if you have a 6-button controller, the controls are obviously going to be better on, the Super Nintendo either way. But with the 6-button controller, it's a lot easier to play than with the 3-button controller. I'll tell you that, because then you don't have to hit A and B just to do one move. Or, have to cycle through your weapons using like the A and C button.
Right.
That could be annoying. So, yeah. I have always recommended the Super Nintendo version, even though I was a Genesis kid. I always recommended the Super Nintendo version. There was a reason why I went over to my friend's house to play this game. Just saying.
Yeah, fair enough. So, the Game Boy and Game Gear versions are unfortunately like a bit neutered, but like they don't look that bad like what they are. There's 5 stages as opposed to 9. They kept the shorter row like those versions. A couple of things like were chopped. They look playable, but obviously not as good as the console versions are going to be. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to go and like check out like at least the Game Boy version, just because the idea of that you only got 2 buttons and 2
right.
A smaller version of this game, I think could be fun and interesting. It's just all a matter of how it was executed.
Definitely. So so it's a surprisingly fun a surprisingly fun game. I definitely had like more more fun with it myself than I expected to have with it. So, thank you for bringing this one to my attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned cheat codes earlier. There are several cheat codes. You just have to punch these passwords link to the menu screen. So there are passwords to give you the stage select. Infinite energy, infinite lives, infinite weapons. There's 2 infinite weapon codes here for some reason. I'm not really sure what the differences are between them, but there are 2 codes listed for some reason. Kill as many civilians as you want, and go to the end of the game. Like I just see the ending of the credits. Mm-hmm. So. Some of those codes like very very powerful. So
yeah.
Reviews. The game actually got very mixed reviews when it came out. It kind of depends upon I guess who's playing it. So they're playing it, whether or not they actually enjoyed it or not. For example, Next Generation, you only give like 2 out of 5 stars. I'm saying the game was just monotonous because of its length and the fact the game action didn't get mixed up enough, which is fair to some degree. It's I wish there was more shooting stage. I wish there was more shooting stages. Like the ski stage or the jet stage. Right?
Right.
But I really didn't think it was that bad. So Japanese magazine Famicom Tushun gave 22 out of 40. EGM gave it 7.1 out of 10, saying that the game's controls and graphics are solid, but and the inclusion of several areas and the variety of weapons is also great. But the game suffers from some mindless and repetitive gameplay. Game Pro said pretty much the same thing. Graphics, music, or the graphics and music the music could be better, but the action is very frantic. And they're also ones, by the way, compared to Zombies Ate My Neighbors, right. As far as the gameplay, went. So Next Generation, they also gave the game 3 out of 5 stars, basically saying, quote, not incredibly original or pretty, just surprisingly fun.
Yeah.
So, which if you wanted to summarize the game in one sentence, that's a pretty good sentence. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be fair, a lot of the reviewers of that time, whenever it was anything like a licensed product, it was always a half-ass kind of review to begin with.
Right. So, yeah.
Like we said, there was kind of a stigma on licensed games.
Yes, exactly. So, the average rating seems to be the average rating of the game seems to be 3 to 5 stars. Mm-hmm. So, which is it probably deserves a hair better, but 3 out of 5 is not if 3 out of 5 is not a terrible score for it.
Agreed.
I'd probably get like 3.5 out of 5 personally, but maybe just nudge up like a bit higher. eBay. This game's surprisingly expensive on eBay for some reason. Maybe because people are discovering the game now for some reason. Maybe because it wasn't like a huge print run. I'm not sure, but or it could just be because of the license tie-in factor. So this game's a bit more expensive than usual Super NES games. So you want to pick up a copy, which you have to get it that way if you want it to a legal copy because the game's never been re-released anywhere because of licensing issues. So. Tournament copies of the game are currently listed on eBay. eBay advised me doing research for the podcast. Tournament copies of the game recently sold. These prices include shipping. Cart only prices ranging anywhere from $42 to $70. So, like I said, definitely a bit more expensive than usually expensive than most Super NES games. CIB ranged wildly, anywhere from $74 to $175. There was even a steel copy of this game that sold recently for $595, which is not bad as far as like steel pricing goes, actually. So, but yeah, $42 for a cart. I'd be hard pressed to say to spend that much for it. It's a good game. I'm not sure it's worth like spending $40 on it for though. Yeah,
half of that, yes, but definitely not 40.
Like I said, I'm not really quite sure why the game is so pricey, but yeah. So if you want the game physically, you just have to be just keep your eyes on eBay and maybe you can snag one for a good deal or part of a bundle or something. Yeah. So I definitely recommend that. But speaking about expensive games. Oh boy, we have a doozy of a game coming up next time as far as like pricing goes because it's a very rare game that only got released in Japan and apparently only came out like 1,000 copies. According to the story. So yeah, we're looking at a shooter that I want to check out for a while now, which I just said has been on my list like for a while to look at. We're gonna be looking at a game called Rendering Ranger R2, which, like I said, for Japan only, very rare, very beautiful graphics. So I'm going to be, and also apparently by our reports, a very difficult game. I've not started playing it yet, but Joe, you already started playing it. Is it indeed difficult?
Yeah, it's super difficult. There are points in where it's unfair, to be honest. So yeah, like I of course, started doing some research for this game and, spoiler, like this game's like going for like $3,000 in some cases.
Yes.
So, and for Japanese only, it's crazy. And spoiler, I don't think it's worth $3,000. But also, like, there's
no games worth $3,000.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's very few games that I would sit there and say, okay, that's worth $3,000. So, yeah, I guess that's pretty much not really a spoiler. But yeah, it's an interesting game, and I guess you guys will have to wait 2 weeks to find out what we think of it.
Right, indeed. So. Anyway, thank you again always for staying tuned to the podcast and listening to this episode. We appreciate it very much. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, suggestions, etc., you can feel free to leave them on our Facebook page, or you can also send me an email directly to the SNESpodcast@yahoo.com. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30, and then you can find me on Facebook. It's the very, very open Facebook.
Thank you again very much for being here as always. Stay safe, be well, and we'll catch you again next time.
Bye.
Later, all.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Pong.